Oh hey guys, let's talk about designing some wispy poofs. So I've got this texture set up here, and this is not intended to be an animation, right? It's only 4 frames. Basically what this would be used for is if you're working in a game, you can randomly choose one of these 4 frames to show and have them radiate out from a center point. So all of these are moving upward, right? So you would take those cards and you would rotate them and then move them out in a ring away from each other, and it would be random shapes because it would choose one of the 4 shapes, and it would create this nice dust poof cloud, right? You can kind of imagine that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to approach shape making when you're making this kind of a texture, and then also sort of the forces of nature that operate on this effect here. So I'm going to hide that flipbook layer, and I'm going to show this bigger one so we can go inside of the symbol and work on it in here. You'll notice that I've got quite a few layers set up here, and I'm going to go through each one of those. So start by hiding my bounding box and locking that layer so I ain't drawing on it. Alright, so the radiating lines. First and foremost, it's important that there's a clear direction of motion, right? So down here at the point right here, you can imagine it's going to be the center of my emitter in the video game, and then every poof of cloud is going to come out from that center, right? So this guy would be moving upward. If I rotated it to the side, it would shoot off to the side, etc. So the radiating lines play into each one of these. You can see there, they're basically all radiating out from the middle point, and those ones as well. And when you're looking at this, you can think of an air current coming from just like the entire bottom. Maybe it makes the whole thing move up in a linear way. Maybe it's fanning out like mine does, or maybe it's all just one straight core line in the middle that everything is following. Whatever you go with, make sure you stick with it as you're drawing all of your different shapes. All of these bubbles here are clearly moving out and away because they're curved this way. They're not curved in. So this point comes in really sharp there. So it gives it the feeling that it's moving out. And then the shapes that do bubble up are also going in that direction. And the same holds true for all of these. This guy has a little bit of a curve that does that right there, but I think you can get away with it when it's small because it creates that nice sideways waviness, and you still get the impression that overall it is moving outwards. If this were like a big cup, like this, it starts to become a little confusing which way it's moving, right? Because it kind of looks like an air current is operating on it that way when it's really not. So I'm going to hide the radiating lines, and we're going to move on to those air currents. I'll show you guys some stuff here. So here I've drawn different arrows, and I'll select a different color. Go with red. So you can see how the wind is like, pushing this wisp around, because when you're thinking of making an effect, there are real forces of nature, well, imagined forces of nature that should work the way that real forces of nature do, right? Like, you want to make it convincing. And a lot of times we see an effect happen and we just think, oh, that's pretty. But we don't connect that there was a force of nature acting on it that made it move in the way that we thought it was appealing, right? So as this guy is coming up here and pushing out this body of cloud, it's forcing this current to take the long way around, right? And it's kind of, the two are kind of playing this dance together where they kind of act on each other. Because if air is coming in right here, I feel like a weatherman, by the way. If a cold front's coming in here, then this guy's going to have to push out and around the other way. This actually works the same way that those weather forecasts and weather in general works. It's hot and cool air pushing on each other. You got a current here coming in, but then this guy's going to push on it, that's going to blow it around. So you can kind of begin to see how those forces of nature are operating in this effect. Come over here and you got something similar, right? This is a good time to talk about variation, because you see I've got this little air current that's coming in here, and then I've got a big one that's pushing up and widening out this space right here, right? And you've got like a pretty simple one that's also radiating out from down here, but it's just kind of carrying this up Meanwhile, there's a major one that's carrying a big body of cloud up with it in that direction. And then this guy up here just kind of doing his thing. Again, over here, kind of a wavy one, mix it in with some straight ones, and then just a simple curve. That's how you get that variation. You know, some of them bob and weave, some of them are more straight on, and so forth. This guy got a little one here next to a bigger one, and then another one up here. All right, so that's air currents in a nutshell, more or less. You get the idea. All right, let's talk about shape. So, you remember that lesson I gave on the shape style guide? Well, I'm going to try to apply it here so you can kind of see it again, how it kind of operates in a solid example. Yeah, that's what I meant. So first thing you notice is these counter curves, where it's curving this way and then it counter curves back in, and that's happening right here on this edge, right? It's subtle, but I exaggerate it with that line. Got another one that's more prominent happening right here, where it's coming in, it's hitting that point right there, and it's curving in the opposite direction. It even does it again down here. Counter curves are a very good way to create interest, where you see that, you know, like air was flying off in this direction, and then it's like pulling this lip outward, right? And that lip is going to kind of like slide out there, and then meanwhile this is like bulging out from that air current that's coming in that way. Fun stuff. The next thing you notice is small, medium, and big shapes. So I've got those kind of dispersed throughout. You've got, you know, some of your smaller ones right here, and you got your bigger ones and medium, and they're just varied in size. It's important that you switch up the sizing throughout your effect. Cool. This guy, you see you got the zigzag going on here, the counter curve again. This time you see it happening inside of the shape mainly. It's encompassing that entire body. You also see, you know, a small shape and then a big shape there, and that giant curve. The negative shapes here also have big, medium, and small. Got a bigger one there, medium, and small. So yeah, I'm just keeping it varied, keeping it switched on up. This guy is a good example of variance, but also keeping it cohesive. So sometimes you run the risk, like, I got a big shape here, and then a little shape here, and then a medium shape here, and it's like they don't really relate to each other. They're just kind of big, medium, and small. Here what I've done is I've taken the basic idea of a shape that's flat on bottom and curved on top, right? Or like, more like that. There's all kinds of things you can do with this shape. You can make it like this. You can make it like this. You can even make it like that at its simplest, right, where it's just one point on the bottom instead of two. And you can see that I've applied that over here to all these different shapes. You got the long skinny one, you got kind of in between one, you got a wide one, and then you got some little ones. And even these little ones, they're asymmetrical, right, where one tip comes down and the other one's more blunted up here. And then the other guy is the other way, right? It's the opposite. So you can see those there and there. So again, variation in shape, but cohesiveness, meaning it's following the same rules, and so they all look like they belong together in the same larger shape. Okay, so here's an offset of timing. So yes, I've got my air currents doing their thing, but they're never going to do it at the same time. In fact, that's one thing about nature that's so appealing. In nature, things don't happen symmetrically, right? It's not like, you know, if you crack a rock, just like slamming it with like a pickaxe or something, the chances that it's going to break equally into two exact halves that are exactly the same size and exactly the same shape are actually really, really slim, unless it's like a geode or something, which even if it's a geode, you're probably going to get more on one side or the other. I digress. The point is, these air currents do not all have the same strength, and they do not all hit at the same time. So you can see that by, you know, the different heights of that I noted there. You can also see, you know, the different puffs are at different points in their progression. So this one is like at the largest point in the middle, and this guy's more finishing up here, right, where he's already gone through the stage of being really big, like that, and now it's up higher and shrunken down because it's starting to dissolve away. This guy down here is just getting started. Alright, so there's a few thoughts on designing dust poofs, and in the next tutorial I'm going to talk a little bit about compositing these bad boys to make them a little more believable for a game style that's not quite as graphical but still calls for some really nicely stylized shapes, but you want to make it feel a little more hand painted all in Flash. So that's it for now, and I hope you learned something.